Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall, Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, JH Realty, and Williams Chiropractic.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant. Happy you could join us on National Cupcake Day. I told you guys it's pretty much all baked goods for the month of December. I'm going to get Big G's favorite cupcake here because he's joined me in studio. It's just us holding it down here. There's a lot of people ailing, moms at home, resting up here, but hopefully having some soup or something. There's a lot of things going around. Hopefully you guys are feeling good out there. But Big G is going to be celebrating cat herding day because it's also cat herding day. So you're going to have to herd me the whole episode by yourself, Big G, with no mom here.
Well, you know what? First of all, Bev, get better, please.
Yes, indeed.
Please get better soon.
Yes, indeed. Yep. The shout out for Big G there. She'll be back in her rightful spot there, I'm sure, soon. But yeah. So what do we think, Big G? Do you have a favorite cupcake? I feel like people are going to say like, just the basic ones. Do you have like an off the board choice, or do you eat a lot of cupcakes? Do you like? I don't do a lot of cupcakes myself.
Look at me.
Hey, I'm not casting any judgments here, Big G. You always do this with the baked goods, but I don't. The food.
Look at me. Look at me.
I've never seen you eat a cupcake.
Look at me. You can show a drive-in movie on each cheek.
I don't know. I don't know if we want to go into what movie, but let's say I'll skip that one for the moment. But do we have a cupcake though?
I've had several thousand cupcakes. Okay. Yes, honestly. The Hostess cupcakes, the
okay, I didn't even think of those
white ones.
Yep, those are classic.
Classic.
I feel like because now you have like the fancy cupcakes, because I know that there's a place in town called Salted Cupcake. I like that. I don't know if you've ever had that.
I've never had it, but
that's been a family favorite.
But salted and cupcake just doesn't sound.
Yeah, I think their most famous one is like a salted caramel combination cupcake. So it's still pretty sweet. I don't think it's actually very salty. We're not venturing into a peanut butter on cheeseburger situation.
You're
here.
Fired.
We're not. I swear we're not going there, because that's not even my favorite. They have like a cookie dough one there that's very good. That one's delicious. I like that one. That one you'd like. That. The salted cupcake's okay. I've had that one. It is sweet, but I'm not a huge fan of that one myself. It's not. They're all very sweet to me now. I think that as I get older, like those heavy sweet desserts, they get kind of sweet to me. But I'm glad Big G's here, because we got a lot of different stuff to talk about. A few things we'll probably mix into the segments. I always try to cover the football weekend, since we have now a different format on Mondays. I'm curious what stuck out to you on the weekend here, Big G. The thing that stuck out to me, this is not normally how I process a game. I enjoy watching the games. Of course, I want to see them win, but win or lose, I usually enjoy watching the games. I'll admit this though. I'm usually a bit of an official sympathist here, but I didn't really. It kind of took the wind out of my sails when they had that whole call with the Parkinson touchdown in the Lions game, and I know that if they would have made what I felt was the correct ruling, that the ball still would have been on the 1 and the game still would have finished the same way. I'm not saying that the Rams deserve to win that game. They're one of the top teams in the NFC. They looked great. I'm not taking anything away from them. It just took the wind out of my sails a little bit because I didn't understand how they could have arrived at that particular conclusion out of the whole myriad of conclusions for that play. I like to analyze how they get there. That just seems to be happening more, not just with the Lions. I'm not doing a Lions thing. A lot of people like to go, my team. It's always your team because that's the team you watch. I watch a lot of games because we cover it a lot, especially for the counter intel segments for the show.
Right.
So I do have to be well versed in the game. So I see this in random games that I have no attachment for. It just seems to be happening more often, and I don't want to attack the refs in the normal way. I just feel like maybe we need to position things better here because you've got more technology than ever, you've got more training available than ever. How are we not doing better? I know the guys are faster and stuff too, and that's tough, but you've got a bigger budget, you've got more technology. How are we not doing better in these games?
Well, first off, that wasn't even a catch.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so
it wasn't even a catch.
Even if you want to go, that's why I say I don't know how you get to that conclusion, because if you want to say, okay, he was down at the 1, which is what a lot of people landed on. Okay, I can kind of wrap my mind around that.
Right.
If you want to say he lost possession and regained it, but survived the ground, I don't understand how those things don't compute. So
right.
if he did indeed cross the end line there, the end zone line, then how did he survive the ground, which that ball was moving, and then you had the whole out of bounds thing. There was just so many things that was the least likely conclusion that I could have possibly saw the actual ruling for that.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you ever read the pool reports that the referees do.
I'm going to start doing that more because I've been interested in this. And I want to start kind of studying it more, but please go ahead.
Reporter, why was it called a touchdown? Because we said it was.
Well, I think this was actually, I did read this. I think this was because this has become a big thing on the scene actually. So I think this was a Will Birchfield bit. He's a beat writer and he's also on the radio. He put this out there and now it's getting retweeted and repurposed.
Okay,
so because I don't think the pool report for this game has actually been released to the public yet. So that's why I say this. We'll verify that. But this has been, I'm glad you brought this up, Big G, because I've seen several people get caught on this in social media. But I think it brings up an interesting point because we've been talking about this thin line on the show between kind of reality and basically the imposter parody accounts that exist out there. Now, some of them are very pronounced. They're supposed to be parody accounts. They say it right in the account. One of the ones I follow in the NBA is called NBA Centel. They have a very good balance. They clearly know the NBA very well, and they release these stories that seem very true, but they say right on their account, this is a parody account, everybody knows. But they just released a story a few weeks ago about there being interest in Anthony Davis going to the Pistons, and then now that's an actual story. So that's how accurate their stories are sometimes. The first time it was released on the beat, I question whether or not they had taken it from NBA Centel or it was actually becoming a real story. That's what's happening with this story because Will Birchfield wrote that, and he's a reputable reporter, but he was doing a bit on his X account, and then it got retweeted and people took it as real because he's not a parody account. So you get something from somebody on the beat, and because I saw some of the other beat writers bringing that up, saying, oh, it's tough to do that as a beat writer because even if you're joking, it's like, well, that's going to be taken as gospel.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because that's where you get your information from.
Yeah, if you're a known parody account, okay, ha ha ha. But if you're a quote unquote legitimate writer, and then all of a sudden you say something that just isn't true and is satire, your credibility's gone.
Exactly, and somebody did bring, because I think Dan Miller, who works with him a decent amount, was then retweeting it and wondering if something had happened to his account, because I get what he was doing there, because he was kind of doing this stranger than fiction thing that happens sometimes, where you could almost believe that they would say that, because that's the explanations have not been up to the standard that we probably deserve as fans and followers of the game, because they just, it's not even about, that's why I say I don't want to do, let's blame the refs. The Rams should have won. I'm taking that out of it. They played well enough to win. That's not the discussion here. I think it's more about these athletes are training so hard, all the coaches, all the athletes, and I want to talk about this with Shane on Thursday too, because we've talked about officiating some. You need to make sure that the officiating level is rising at the same rate that the playing and coaching levels are, because all those things need to be elite to operate properly.
And that brings me to my number one gripe, complaint, itch thing ever. The National Football League is the most valuable league in the world. Well, not in the world, but of the four majors. And they bring in the most revenue. They bring in the most everything. The Super Bowl's the highest watch program. They are the only league with part-time officials. They are the only league that does not have full-time officials, and I don't understand how. They have part-time officials, and I think they're getting to the point where they're just fanboys who are there to shake hands with Patrick Mahomes or Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff or. Let's hire them full-time. Let's make them go through year-long training. I don't want some guy that's Walt the janitor 8 months of the year and then a pro football referee the other however many months. Basketball's got full-time officials. Hockey's got full-time officials. Baseball's got full-time officials.
This is one of my main, I'm right with you here, Big G, because this is one of my main things about the whole thing is you definitely want to pay them appropriately to maintain the integrity of the game, all of that, and pay them for a full year, but the off season, quote unquote, for them is continued. It's almost like, to me, it would be like being a teacher. The people that aren't, I have tons of friends that are teachers, and they always get a little frustrated when people say, well, you have 3 months off. It doesn't really end up being 3 months off if you're a teacher. You end up going later than the students at the end of the year.
Sure.
You start sooner, and you do a lot of continued education in the summer times if you're doing it right. And that's what I envision for a proper referee training program, is if you're doing some training in the off season and you get the new rules and you're actually going back to school every year, where you're making sure, hey, maybe they even review their own film and do, there's all sorts of ideas here. I'm working on a couple connections to actually get a referee, a former referee, because I don't want it to be a current one, because then it would be harder for them to, I think, speak as freely. But somebody that's got experience that can help us break this down, because it's a lot harder than you and I can both imagine, watching it on our couches, seeing everything in 4K or whatever we're viewing things in now on the TVs.
Absolutely.
And they slow it down in slow motion, and they zoom in on everything. I totally understand all that, and that's why I have been empathetic to the plight of the officials. But it is time that we put some things in place here, because why I lamented that call wasn't because it went against the Lions. That wasn't even why. I think that I did think that disrupted the momentum a little bit of the game, and then it led to the scenario at the end where they had to score a couple touchdowns, never got the ball back.
Yep.
I think we could have had a classic Matt Stafford, Jared Goff shootout that by the way it was going, the Rams probably should have and could have won still.
Right.
But it would have been a true shootout at the end, and we kind of lost out on the last part of an epic game because not only did we have that, but you watch it very intently too, Big G. The next play from scrimmage was a combination of a hit to Jared Goff's head and a pass interference on the same play that they missed. So now I realize that there were probably calls that they missed on the Rams side. Again, I'm not doing the Lions thing. I just don't like it when it affects the gameplay. I don't like it when it makes us miss out on what could have been with a very exciting ending in what's developing into a great rivalry of two quarterbacks that got traded for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we could go on for this for God knows however long, but we got other things to talk about as well. So
yeah, exactly. And Big G, as people know out there, is a big wrestling fan. So we are going to talk some wrestling. That'll probably be in Tyler Kuehl's segment. He's the 8:15 slot. We've got Connor Earegood to talk some Michigan State at 7:45. But up next, we've got Wes Davenport of the Pistons Pin Down podcast. He's going to talk some Pistons with us. We've been wanting to get him on the show to get his take on the Pistons. So we'll kick off with that here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. But this isn't going to be war with Wes. I'm always excited to get Wes Davenport on of the Pistons Pin Down and a bunch of other podcasts. I think we might have lost him here. We're having some connection issues with him. So Big G's going to venture to get him back, but we have made contact with him, so hopefully we'll be able to get him on. Otherwise, Big G and I will pick up the conversation here. We're having some communication issues with our phone, but I'm excited to get his takes on the Pistons because this is a team that has done very well here this year, but the discussion seems to always center around who they're going to add in the off season or in the mid season here up until the trade deadline. It's never, they've got a good enough team. They're 20-5, I think, at this point. They're the top team in the East. They're going to be competitive. Not a lot of the pundits, quote unquote, are considering them as a real threat to win the Eastern Conference as a whole. And that's interesting to me because I think this team could do it. They highlighted at the beginning of the season how wide open this was and how we have a wide open Eastern Conference, how Boston doesn't have Jason Tatum. Indiana doesn't have Tyrese Halliburton, and so teams like Orlando and other teams got a bit aggressive. Detroit didn't do that. They made kind of some lower key acquisitions. I think we've got Wes on the line. This is a good place to start with him, actually, if he's on the line, because Wes, this is a team that you've watched for a long time, covered for a long time, and it's interesting to me for a team that's atop the Eastern Conference where the conversation isn't about how dominant they've been, how deep they've been. It's, hey, who are they going to add to this team here?
Yeah, it is interesting, and thank you for having me on. Sorry for the technical issues.
No
I think
problem.
it was on my end, so my apologies for that. But excited to be here as always. But yeah, it's interesting how much of the online conversation in like national media is just like you said. It's on trying to make some sort of big acquisition, and I think. For Pistons fans, right, we got to you look at this team, and like you said, they're incredibly deep. They've been playing an 11 or 12-man rotation and winning games. You've had a young player like Jalen Duren stepping up and really looking kind of like he might be an all-star this year as that second running mate there as a star player next to Cade Cunningham. I mean, at this point, it's all about that internal development that this team has had, and I think you just kind of have to sit back and enjoy the ride. Like, they don't need another star right now. They've got one. They don't need more depth. They've got one. They're just in an enviable position here at the top of the Eastern Conference.
I'm right there with you. I like, because this is something that happens in sports, and I remember talking about this at the beginning of the season because Houston was in a somewhat similar position to the Pistons as an ascending team. But they've gone a different direction. They have a young core. They have a Thompson brother, so they have a very similar had a similar outlook. They got a coach that for some reason was let go from his former team and was a quality coach and was able to get him. Udoka obviously had the issues in Boston, so that's why he was available. Bickerstaff, I still kind of question why he was let go, but I'm glad the Pistons got him. And then you end up with a good culture driver. You got good GMs on both teams, but Houston went a radically different direction. And I don't know about you, but when they made that trade, I know a lot of people were really excited about it, and that made them one of the favorites. And it's obviously Kevin Durant's one of the better players of all time. It's not even really about his part of it. I like that they're staying the course of, like you said, they've got younger guys, and those guys, if you give them the headroom, because that's a big thing in basketball as a whole. One of the guys that was on the show before here was talking about maybe getting a guy like Michael Porter Jr. I don't think he's a great culture fit for the Pistons. I get what he's doing there. A tall kind of stretch for 3-point shooter that can score, rebound. I get the profile. I don't think it's a great culture fit, but he's also increased his usage because he's gone from Denver, where he's an ideal situation getting fed from Murray and Jokic, to then Brooklyn, where he's got all this usage that's available, and so then he's taking a lot more shots. That's what you're doing when you're adding somebody into the fray, so you got to be careful to do that in Detroit, because right now you like that the usage is going where it is.
Yeah, you do, and I think, you just have to be confident, I think, with this Pistons team right now and into the future too, right? Like this team is built off of Cade Cunningham, a 24-year-old two-way superstar right now in the league. Is he the best player in the Eastern Conference? Like, maybe. He's got an argument. You got Jalen Duren's looking like he might be one of the best centers in the Eastern Conference as well. Sar Thompson's an all-NBA caliber defender. You can just go up and down this roster, and they have not only talent, but like you said, it's young talent. And when you're stocked full of young, talented players who are really vibing together well, the locker room seems like it's in a great place. Like you mentioned, the culture's been unbelievable all year. I mean, you even had Cade Cunningham showing his leadership chops after they win. What was it? Maybe they're like 12th in a row or something, and he just wasn't happy about it because they let the Pacers come back a little bit, right? So you've got all this great stuff going on, and I think you just have to kind of sit back and realize, like, this team is this good, and they're this good with players that are this young. So you've got time, right? Let's see how far they can go with this core group. I'm right there with you. I don't think they need a big move or anything like that. I think you can be confident that not only are they good right now, but they're going to be good into the future too with this base that they have.
Exactly, because I think we're now realizing that, especially with the thing that you highlighted at the beginning, which is Duren's development. I think the big question was, okay, who's going to be the number two? I think the second, not necessarily the two in position on court, but the number two to Cade, the Robin to his Batman, because he is a guy that's going to make all of the teammates better. And I don't know even that. I think this would be good to get your idea on this here, Wes, because I think that's a somewhat outdated concept too, because it used to be almost like a video game build of these teams. Okay, you got to accumulate all these stars. It's got to be like Pokemon. You got to catch them all, and you got to put them on the team and put them in the lineup. And then, that worked for some teams and some eras and everything, especially in the modern day. LeBron was able to do that on a couple different teams and accumulate the stars. Now I feel like we're in a little bit different of an era where the teams that have tried to do that have been busting out at a little higher rate. The Clippers have been dealing with that. How many stars have we seen pass through there, including who they have now? And that's flaming out. Whereas these teams that build around these young cores with a star It's often a guard, but a star player that can elevate his teammates. We're seeing it with Oklahoma City right now with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and what he's been able to do with everybody else that he's got there. I think the best comparison almost to the Pistons or the model that proves they can do something with what they've got is the Pacers of last year. You had Halliburton, whose style is very similar to Cade. I know Detroit fans won't like that comparison, but it's true of most people in the NBA. He's got a very similar style. He's a good leader. He gets the most out of his teammates. And then you've got a whole host of other people where, sure, Siakam was probably his number 2 guy, but it was hard to figure out who was 2, 3, 4, 5 through a lot of that run. You've now got the Pistons. Go ahead, Wes.
Sorry. No, it sounded like you stopped there. It must have cut out on my end. I was only going to add on that I really do think you're onto something. Where we're seeing it with OKC this year, we saw it, like you said, with the Pacers last year. It's depth nowadays. That new CBA really shook up the ability to accumulate all of that star talent, like you said. I mean, even in Detroit right now, when you start mapping out the salary cap for the next 3 or 4 years, you have to start playing some uncomfortable games about who's going to actually get paid and who's not. So I don't think it's really a coincidence that, like you mentioned, the really successful teams right now, they've got, 1, maybe 2 real legit stars, and then just a good 5 or 6 other guys that would be starters anywhere else. A couple of them are coming off the bench. And OKC's in a weird spot because they've had all that draft capital and they've drafted really well. They've probably got 15 players that would all be getting minutes across the rest of the league. But the Pistons right now too, they're not to that extent, but there are 12 players, maybe 13 that are like that too. I think you could even look at maybe a Denver or a Rockets who've gone out and gotten a Kevin Durant. They've got great depth out there too. This is more. I think that the league is not only becoming a little bit more even, a little bit more parity up and down, but also more of a team game. At least what I would have wanted as a fan too. So I'm all for it.
Oh, definitely. And you hit on the depth. That's I think the thing that we're dealing with why they're talking about the trade. So we got to take a break, but I want to talk about that because I think that's why people are immediately going, well, there's too many guys to play. Let's trade some away. But that depth has been very useful for the Pistons, and I think will be useful as the season plays out. But we'll pick up with that with Wes after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Wes Davenport of the Pistons Pin Down podcast, having a good discussion about said Pistons and the NBA as a whole, because it gave me an idea too, Wes. I know you've got an economics background too, so I'm sure you like to kind of nerd out about the cap stuff. So this would be a good conversation for the off season as we kind of get into this new format of the show where we'll be doing more off-season coverage of basketball. I'd like to have more discussions of the whole salary cap thing, because I think people don't understand that to the degree it's become much harder. I'm somebody that likes the finance side and the economics side as well. I'm not as well versed in it as you are with the current cap situation, but I think the move to the current cap lost a lot of the regular fans because the whole apron thing was much more complex than the previous rule setup.
Yeah, much more complex. And so I'm not as well versed on the finance side of it as much. I think if you want to have someone on to have like a really deep cap like numbers breakdown, our guy at Detroit Bad Boys, Kyle Metz, would be perfect for that. He's an expert there, more so than myself. But what I can speak to a little bit is if we could simplify it down, what changed is the incentives, right? So if you're up over the cap now, because the NBA is a soft cap, so there is a hard cap. It's just really, really way up there. Most teams don't even approach it. So you've got these different levels of over the cap that a team can be. And now there are some pretty severe penalties, not only for going multiple levels right over the cap, but there are also severe penalties for staying a certain amount of levels over the cap for multiple years in a row. That's what really got in the way for Boston this past offseason. The reason they were shedding a bunch of salary was because they had been over the cap so much for, I think it was 3 years at that point, and the luxury tax bill was way too high, and their owner couldn't do it anymore. So they had to make a change, and it made sense because of Tatum's injury. So what's really going on is that incentive change. It's no longer like a minor slap on the wrist if you have three superstars all getting max contracts and you go over the cap quite a bit to fill out the rest of your roster. Now you're losing picks. Now you're not able to make pretty easy, simple, like in-season trades. Because in the past, you'd be able to like trade out a second-round pick and take back a player. Well, now if you're really getting penalized, that player's contract has to be even smaller, right? So there are all these little things that just make it really painful and difficult to operate as a significantly over-the-cap team for multiple years in a row. And teams are afraid of that naturally, right? So that is why you've seen so much of a shift to depth. That's why you've had a player this past offseason like Cam Thomas, who's a restricted free agent, pretty good player, 20-plus points per game scorer. In the past, that'd be a guy that gets a lot of money, but no one wanted to pay him. He's a restricted free agent, and that ties up your money in free agency for a little bit. And no one really had money to spend anyway because everyone was so close to the cap. So all these restricted free agents ended up getting squeezed. And it all does kind of go back to what you had brought up earlier when you're talking about the good teams right now are the teams that have many rotation caliber players that are able to step in and play some good minutes for them. If you're not a deep team in the NBA right now, your team's probably not all that great because there just aren't all that many clusters of superstars. And where they do exist, they're either older and injured, kind of like the Los Angeles Clippers, or it's a team that drafted and developed them and got really lucky or were just that good when you're looking at OKC.
It's a much more sustainable model to have kind of the draft and development side of things. I know that fans are inherently a little impatient and want their teams to get better quickly. Now, the Pistons kind of did that. You're talking about that with OKC. The Pistons did that in one of the more surprising ways possible. You could see the young core developing, but then all of a sudden they went from, the fact that they mirrored the two runs and basically had that long losing streak on pace to be one of the most losing teams ever, to then picking up with a win streak of basically kind of identical cadence, which was very interesting here early in the year. And to do that essentially a couple years apart is pretty incredible. So that's a quick turnaround with what you have.
Yeah, no kidding. I think it was Omari Sankofa from the Detroit Free Press, our guy. He mentioned that the Pistons won, I think it was their 13th win in a row on the same date against the Pacers, as they had a couple years prior lost their 13th in a row against the Pacers in the same arena. It was some wild coincidences that were going on over that winning streak.
Yeah, that was crazy, and it's with, obviously they've layered in some other players. They've got the GM, a different GM now, a different coach, and obviously the right ones in those positions. And they've been through some of the trials and tribulations that can help some of these young players learn and grow and all of that stuff. But now they are in a great position here because, that part of that win streak was pretty incredible to me, that they were putting out these lineups. And I am not demeaning any of these players because I like a lot of these depth players. I watch a lot of G League games. I watch a lot of Summer League. So I have a tendency to see some of these players before we see them kind of get elevated. So I had seen Tolu Smith play a decent amount. I've seen Danis Jenkins play a lot. But the idea that they were putting lineups out there that were Danis Jenkins and Javonte Green and Paul Reed, and basically missing all of their star players and 7-8 rotation players, and still continuing that streak was incredible to me, because those guys, they clearly were the right picks and were the depth players that you needed. But I don't know that we necessarily felt that way when at the beginning of the season there were people saying, hey, we need another ball handler, even though Dennis Jenkins was looming and in one of the two-way spots, or hey, we need kind of a 3-and-D guy, and then Javonte Green wanders his way on to the back end of the roster. Seemingly every move like that has worked for the Pistons thus far.
Yeah, it has, and I think, to me, probably the most surprising thing out of all of it was how individually unsurprising it really was. Like, you look at Paul Reed. We know Paul Reed's a good player. He's overqualified as a third big. He's just very undersized. So, it's been difficult for him to stick around elsewhere in the NBA. But he's a perfect fit here culture-wise, and a perfect fit here for what the Pistons want to do, just because he's so disruptive defensively, and he can go get a bucket when he really needs to. Like Paul Reed having a couple of good games, that makes sense. Dennis Jenkins too. I know he's on a two-way, but he ended last season's G League season on a real big hot streak. He was playing incredible basketball. Comes into the summer league this past off season, and he lights up the summer league too. He looked too good for the summer league. It was him and Ron Holland. They just looked like they didn't belong there at all. And so, it's not surprising when he just kind of takes that performance and he's doing the exact same thing, right, in NBA games. It's the same thing with Javonte Green. Like, we can go all the way up and down this roster. The 13 guys that have played and gotten minutes, that they individually were playing well, it's not necessarily surprising. What's more surprising is that the Pistons were able to still win the games with those guys being featured pieces, right? Because you were missing Duren, you were missing Cade, you were missing Asar Thompson a little bit in there. And I think at that point, when you're looking at the roster and you're saying, okay, yes, they have the talent. These guys are all clearly talented basketball players, proven that they're NBA rotation pieces. So you can stick them out there and they're not going to go lose you the game. Now you start to have to give JB, the coaching staff, and Cade Cunningham a little bit of credit, because I'm not one that usually believes in culture wins in the NBA, but it certainly looks like there is an established standard for how Pistons basketball is going to be played on a night-to-night basis. And credit to the guys in the locker room, but nobody wanted to let that standard down, even when they had a lot of injuries. So it's a credit, I think, to the coaching staff, to the leadership in the locker room, that, man, like, you looked at Dennis Jenkins, he doesn't want to let down, Cade, who's out, or you looked at Paul Reed and he's doing his best Isaiah Stewart impression out there, and that's about as close to a culture wins as I think I've ever seen.
Oh, I would say so. And I know the word culture gets thrown around a lot, especially in Detroit, but these teams are clearly trying to protect it too. The fact that they have something that they know is working, that's why they are careful in the pieces that they add in, because that does affect the ecosystem of a team. The other thing that I was thinking when you were talking about kind of that team building aspect and the young players and the young core is the fact that I think one of the things that gets lost on people with the whole team building thing is the fact that you can pay different prices for the same thing depending on where you are as a team. For example, we can use the Pistons as an example. When they were losing, it was hard for them to acquire free agents. They weren't exactly a marquee destination for people. They were losing. You have people that don't necessarily, I'm not saying anything about Detroit specifically here, but it's the Midwest. It's cold. It's, it's not necessarily the appeal where you can go down to South Beach and take them out there when you're trying to recruit a guy. It's not quite the same thing. So you don't have that bigger market appeal. There's some things that aren't the same. But if you're trying to recruit somebody in that era, then you're often going to have to overpay or wait till the market's kind of picked over. But if you've got a young team that now has developed and now you are a destination, sure, you're still in Detroit, but you're a pretty warm destination as far as a player that's looking to kind of revive their career, a Duncan Robinson. I know that was kind of a trade element there, but somebody like a Duncan Robinson or a Karis LeVert, they're looking at this young core and going, hey, this can be something. I want to join this team, and then you're not having to pay the same amount for those players, plus you're drafting the current players on your roster and then often being able to get them to stay under different circumstances and different terms and not necessarily having to overpay through the free agent process. So I think that's a part that gets lost on people too from a team building aspect.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And, you bring up Karis LeVert, Duncan Robinson. Those are looking like fantastic signings right now. Duncan Robinson's floor spacing is just vital to that starting lineup. They need him to be a gunner, and he has been. Karis LeVert's been great off the bench. He's almost up. I think he's a little bit over now, 40% from three, Ryan. Like, for as cold as he started, Karis LeVert is looking really, really strong right now, and he's even been a solid defender, I thought, in these recent weeks as well. So those are looking like great signings. Before we went to break, you brought up the idea, well, it's expensive to go and trade for another real star-level piece, and I think this all just fits right into that, right? Because when you're looking at this Pistons team, and we're having this conversation about the depth, right? They've got a Paul Reed, they've got a Dennis Jenkins. We haven't even brought up Marcus Sasser, who in short minutes went and scored, I think, 7 points in about 3 or 4 minutes in garbage time. That's an NBA player right there, Marcus Sasser. Jaden Ivey's still working his way back. He's still on kind of a minutes restriction. He hasn't played much over 15 minutes a night as he's getting his legs back under him. So there are players still on this team that already aren't getting as many minutes, as many opportunities as they probably will moving forwards, and maybe in Sasser's case, unless injury even shows up. And I think that if it were me, right, and we're going to try to have a fireside chat with some fans, it would be to shift the framing of this depth thing in our minds, because it's not a problem that a player like Marcus Sasser is good and is not getting minutes. That's a luxury, right? It's not a problem that Paul Reed is well overqualified as a third center, and on most nights he doesn't play. That's a luxury, because when something like over that winning streak happens, when you're down Cade, well, you got Dennis Jenkins, or you're down Duren, and you got a Paul Reed, or Isaiah Stewart's in foul trouble, right? And Javonte Green can step up and play even more minutes as the 4, right? Like this. That's what deep teams have, and to just kind of get rid of that because, well, they got too many players, I think that's just the wrong way to look at it. They have too many players, and that's a good thing. That's where I'm at right now.
Oh, exactly. Plus, you're reducing the minute load of all of these guys over the course of the regular season. So when you head into the off season, you've got fresher legs to make a longer run here potentially. But
sure, yeah.
But great stuff. I appreciate the discussion, and we'll look forward to having you back on here when you're available. I know you got a busy schedule, but be sure to tell people where they can follow you here in the meantime too.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate coming on. Like always, this has been great. So you guys, if you're listening, the Pistons Pulse, I produced that podcast for the Detroit Free Press. That's our guy Omari Senko for the second. If you're not reading him, make sure that you are. We've also got Bryce Simon on that one for Motor City Hoops. He's doing a really great Substack too. So if you guys aren't reading that, it's free, and you could get detailed game breakdowns from a guy that actually does real scouting work. So it's an incredible resource if you just want to learn a little bit more about the game. And if you want to listen to my voice more frequently, well, then my friend Blake Silverman, we do the Pin Down for Detroit Bad Boys, a podcast every week where we do basically a mailbag show. You could even call in. We've got a number where you could leave a voicemail and we play your voice on the show. And otherwise, just make sure you're following Detroit Bad Boys. And Ryan, I think I covered that all. There's a lot that I had to get through, so apologies for taking too long.
Oh, no problem. It was great stuff, and you can hear all those people on the show too. All those people have been on, and hopefully we'll get them back on as the season progresses, as well as yourself. So we appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to having you back on.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, Wes. Take care. Thanks to Wes Davenport. Appreciate him coming on. We're going to turn our attention to the Spartans here, both the basketball and football sides of things, and Connor Earegood of the Detroit News. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on our next guest here, Connor Earegood. He's been on the show before. He writes for the Detroit News, does a great job covering Michigan State, and there's been a lot to cover. We focus on football on the other show typically, but I got to cover some football with him because we've been rotating in our Spartans coverage with not really knowing what was going to happen with that coaching situation, and now we've had a resolution there, and so now there's a lot of emphasis on that. But man, I don't want to overshadow this basketball team either, Connor, because they have been very good, and so part of me wanted to start with football, but I think we should start with basketball because they've played their way into the first segment here.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, they've been pretty strong as of late. A couple messier games. The Duke loss, I think, is one that stings for them because it was very much in their grasp and could have won that game. Obviously, a lead at halftime, and then things fell apart when Duke switched to zone. But a clunky loss on the road at Penn State. But given that place is a church in some ways, it's a little awkward to play there. And also, I think anytime you miss a dozen layups, those things tend to bite you. So. No, Michigan State's in a really good spot. Point guard Jeremy Fears is probably one of the best passers in the country. I mean, he's leading the nation in assists, but he's also had some that, poor shooting has maybe wiped off the slate. Jackson Kohler's almost averaging a double-double. So they got a lot of depth. They got a good rotation, and they've been pretty fun to watch so far.
Even in that loss, they still – I feel like they fared pretty well because, like you said, they really didn't play their best game for playing. And granted, yeah, you're playing at Duke, and it's a tough, it's a very tough opponent. I mean, Boozer is going to be the guy to follow. He looks like the early favorite to be the number one pick. They've got two Boozer brothers there, by the way. The younger one looks good as well, and they've got a ton of other talent, but I thought with how Michigan State played, it gave them, say those two teams had to meet up again and they were both one seeds or what have you in the tournament, and then they eventually had to have a rematch in the Final Four. They had a little bit of a blueprint to win that game because the Boozer is so dominant for a lot of reasons. He's a big guy that can do pretty much everything, but they have a lot of depth and a lot of force up front. But Michigan State's able to match that, and I think that's one of their strengths when I see them match up against all these other teams, because that front line between Kohler, who, like you said, is a double-double machine but can go outside, Cooper, who's developing his skill set, and then you slot in Cohen Carr as a small forward who I think on a lot of teams wouldn't necessarily play small forward, but that's a great, formidable front line with some depth pieces too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think too, like the sorts of, you have a bad night against a team like Duke. Like, I think there's value in losing to a good team like that. Obviously, any team wants to win those games, and I think there's more value in a win, as we saw against Kentucky and North Carolina and Arkansas earlier in the year. But learning where the limitations are, learning where areas that a team needs to get better. I think there's value in that, and also seeing, how everything stacks up and the pace of play against a team that I think is probably going to be hanging banners of some sort at the end of the season in Duke. I mean, that's a really good team, obviously very talented, well coached, defensively, one of the better teams I've seen all year. And I know they've played some pretty tough teams as well in the schedule. So I've had a lot of people get on me about my AP ballots the past couple of weeks, but I really put a lot of stock into strength of schedule and, who wins are. And even sometimes the losses too, if you're losing to a team like that versus beating, a smaller mid-major or low-major opponent, I think there's a lot of value in those sort of top-ranked games. And that's why I really like the schedule that Tom put together is, you have those 4 ranked matches at the start of the season, and then going into a pretty tough Big Ten slate that, I think is going to be a war for a lot of teams. So it should be a really, really fun basketball season, and it's only just yet getting underway.
It's a classic Izzo pre-Big Ten schedule here, and I think if at the beginning of the season you said, hey, they're going to be 9-1 in their first 10 games, I think most people would have taken that, because you're going to see that obviously Duke was probably the most likely to lose to, but like you said, they've had a lot of very tough matchups in there, and they fared very well with those, and in the loss they didn't look bad, as I mentioned, but I think they've also kind of hit on something here too. I'm curious to get your thoughts, because the position that has been by far the most in flux, because we talked about the front court a little bit and how strong they are. You talked about Fears and how strong he is, and he just continues to develop. The one, not necessarily, I don't want to say hole, but the one missing link was the 2 spot, the off guard spot, and as the season was kind of developing, I was thinking, okay, I can see some of these guys as potential pieces, and it was like one guy played decently well, at least on a given night, and that was kind of occupying that off guard wingman kind of slot. And so sometimes it'd be Fort, sometimes it'd be, Kurt Tang would have a game, Scott would look good, but I didn't really envision them going to the lineup that they had recently with Ogochukwu as the 2 guard, and obviously that went pretty well. I would say much above, I think, anybody's reasonable expectation.
Yeah, I think the big question there is just the rotation. Devine is a good scorer. Defensively, still has some work to do. That was a problem at Miami as well, but when he was brought in, they sort of thought they could work in those areas of his game, and he had obviously was a late portal ad as well, given that Jace Richardson declared and they were keeping a spot and all that. But that went about as well as they could in terms of roster construction to get a guy like Devine. But I think it's going to be about how the rotation responds. I think we saw some clear maybe an adjustment to the level of play from Denim Wojcic. He did not look his best, and he's only really played kind of piecemeal minutes late in games here and there through the first 9 games. So doing that at Penn State, I think, was a big adjustment for him, and I don't think he quite answered that test, or maybe, I would probably give him like a C+ at best, and that's being really generous to him in that role. So I think they're going to have to figure out if they're going to play Devine at the 2, who's going to be that backup point guard when someone needs a breather, because, when they subbed him and Fears off alternately and tried to keep someone on, it didn't have as much of a flow. And obviously Wojcic being in there a little bit, felt like it might be a little bit of this Penn State team is pretty beatable, so let's see what we can do. I think that might have been the mentality, just to get some live reps and see how guys respond when the bullets are flying, I guess. But it is sort of a precarious situation, right? Because there's 4 guys you would say that can fill in pretty adequately at that position. I mean, Kurt Tang is a decent enough shooter that has some defensive problems that he's working through, and I think it's also a size thing there. Trey Fort, offensively, I don't think he's ever seen a shot he didn't think he could take, but he also defensively kind of gets lost here and there. And then Jordan Scott is sort of the dark horse, I think, to take that role. Freshman wing from the DMV area who just does all the little things right, and every teammate at Michigan State, I think, really, really likes him, and all they want to see him do is shoot, and he's almost too nice where he won't do it. And loves to pass and set up his teammates and just go be scrappy for the rebound. But he's slowly getting his shot together. Back-to-back games, he's had 2 threes. Looks pretty good in against Duke. So I think that's something to monitor going forward, is what role he could play as well.
You basically answered my next question, which was going to be, how do you see that going forward? Because one of the main reasons you highlighted it, one of the main reasons I didn't see them going with Ugochukwu is because he fills a very valuable role once he stepped up to kind of seeing that he could do that backup point guard role, because I mean, Fears is very important, but you've got to let him get his minutes off the court too, especially with how much volume he has, how much usage he has. So you've got to have a valuable backup. He's done well in that position, and then to see him do so well as the off guard was like, okay, does this play him on? I'm more on your side. That's what I was going to ask you, is who you could see as that shooting guard if they don't go with Ugochukwu and they keep him slotted into kind of that maybe a hybrid role, but that backup point guard role. I think it's got to be Scott, because if you're looking at kind of the natural progression. Those other guys have a little bit more under their belt. Tang is still pretty young. Fort's been around. But the idea that the development under an Izzo team and getting minutes as a young guy, having the faith of your teammates and seeing what we've been seeing, I wonder if it's going to be something where he eventually becomes, I think the ideal situation is he becomes a strong enough starter. And maybe, depending on how the game flow is going, maybe that means that Ugochukwu is part of your closing unit, where that you can then burn both of those guys at the same time if you need to do that. And obviously that depends on what happens throughout the game and who's hot and all of that. But the game isn't always about who's the starting five. It's often about who's the ending five, because teams often have a valuable six man that's going to close the game. And you know that one starter isn't going to close it out. But these are all good problems to have, because you can see already that through 10 games, okay, yeah, there's some potential emerging. That, not that I'm comparing any of these guys to Jace Richardson, but at game 10 Jace Richardson was a lot different than, game 25 Jace Richardson.
Yeah, and I think there's a similarity to how Jace sort of rose as a starter last year and fixed a lot of the problems for last year's starting lineup. You can move Jaden Akins to the 3. You can do a lot of things where, it was a similar transfer problem, right? Frankie Fiddler came in and wasn't quite the guy I think Michigan State expected him to be from Omaha, and eventually they solved that. But I think there's a parallel there. I think Jordan Scott's probably the best option they have there for what the rest of the rotation can do, because I think if you start him there, you don't have to ride him for 10 minutes or something like that. Just get him started. You can sub Divine in, or you can even move him to get Cohen Carr a rest as well, depending on how he's doing. I know he's had a bit of a slower start. He's had a few good games, but maybe the inconsistency has been there in the past 3 or 4. But and he's obviously dealing with some wear and tear, and guys sort of hacking on him a little bit because of the dynamic threat he poses. But the way they can work that part of the rotation and get a few different looks. I mean, their front court I think is mostly set, especially at the 4 and 5. I think Carson Cooper, Cam Ward, and Jackson Kohler can give you kind of all the minutes you need. And Jesse McCullough's shown some good things in impact spots here and there. I think he might play fewer and fewer minutes down the stretch, just because he looks a little bit raw still. But I think how they sort of address the two is going to sort of dictate the rest of what the rotation is going to look like. And yeah, I think Divine would be good in a closing scenario if they're down. I wouldn't sleep on how Scott can play defensively, though. I think if they need to close out a game, and I think we saw this against Duke, even if they didn't really close that out and sort of fell apart down the stretch, but some of their best minutes were with Scott out there with Fears and sort of the defensive challenges that he poses with his length.
I agree. I think it depends on the need, which is nice that you have different people that can fit those different needs. And there were two more names that I wanted to hit on before we were done, and you hit on both of them, because Ward and McCullough have both looked good in their roles too, and I think could develop as the season goes on. So I think the future looks bright for them here, and I'll look forward to covering them throughout the season with you and others here. But we're going to take a quick break and then probably come back with some football, because I got to get your takes on the football side too, because that's another part where there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of restored hope. It went from the team being fairly I feel like the mood was fairly down in East Lansing, and it seems like it's improved in a hurry. So I want to get your take on that transition and how things are going thus far. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here with Connor Earegood of the Detroit News, talking some Spartans here. Talked about the basketball team, which it could deserve 2 segments on its own here, and we'll be covering them as the season goes on. But got to talk a little football with you here, Connor, because I know I've covered the Spartans a decent amount over the course of the year because I really thought that this year could have gone differently. Obviously, that's not the case, and there's a lot of things that could go differently, and you can't really explore the butterfly effect too effectively. But Smith, there's a lot of things that could have gone different, but it went from a lot of hope to hopeless pretty quickly, it seemed like, from the fan base standpoint. And then that flipped around pretty quickly again. It seemed, and I'm curious to get your take of kind of the temperature in the area there, covering the beat, because it's just flip-flopped where now they were kind of, I was a little concerned about them getting into the coaching carousel so late because there was a lot of movement, but they seemed to have gotten their guy. They seemed to know who they were going after and be well positioned for that. But I'm curious to kind of get your take on how that all went and how people are feeling now, because there seems to be a lot of juice with some of the former players that I know and alumni and the fan base here.
Yeah, I mean, they got their top choice. Like, anytime you can do that, no matter when you jump in the pool, I think that's always a win. And, I heard Pat Fitzgerald's name float around a little bit as soon as that UCLA loss hit. And sort of after that, I think was when that, you mentioned the hopeless, sort of listless effect. I think that's when that sort of hit, was after the UCLA game. That was the first one where it wasn't a sort of team that could overmatch them in some aspects, that still walked away. I mean, it was an interim coach leading them after Deshaun Foster was fired. So, Jonathan was always fun to cover. Never really, not to say coaches lie, but he never played like the media games or anything like that. He'd just tell you what he knew, and usually was pretty sound in some reasoning. I think there's some play calls and decision making. Punting to Caden Weegan in the Iowa game, I'll never understand, but it just didn't work out at Michigan State for him. And I think all parties involved sort of realized that. I've never seen a coach get fired and the athletic director, president, and successor all say, really nice things about the coach. And people tend to speak well about people who they're moving on from, right? You don't want to, kick someone while they're down and after you fire them. But I think Smith did a lot of good things for the roster construction of this program, but ultimately he couldn't win, and that's what people want to see. And I think that's what sort of the message is with Pat Fitzgerald, 14th all-time in Big Ten wins in the history of the conference. Obviously that happened at Northwestern, where it's kind of hard to win. And I think we're sort of seeing that David Braun isn't exactly, winning 8-9 games like some of the seasons that Pat Fitzgerald had. And obviously his final two seasons were sort of not even middling, pretty bad. He was 4-20 in those final two seasons at Northwestern, and then the scandal hit. So I think there's a lot of promise for what he can bring to this team, and especially defensively, being a linebacker, being able to coach that side of the ball a little better than I think we saw with Smith. He brought in Max Bulla, who's a two-time captain at Michigan State, and revered sort of player. Joe Rossi's coming back, and I think that Joe Rossi's a good defensive coordinator that was sort of limited in his roster and who he could use, and some of the decisions there, and also didn't have much in the way of complementary football. So there's a lot to be excited about for Michigan State football. It's only just getting underway. The staff's still getting together. The roster is going to change here. But so far, so good from that sort of perspective.
That's why the timing is so important with this, because when I say they got into the coaching carousel late, it's not even just the coaching carousel now. It's being able to manage the whole NIL thing, transfer portal, recruiting, all of that stuff. The timing has changed so drastically in the last couple of years and is continuing to change that I was kind of amazed how well Fitzgerald was able to do. And I think he was even hoarse in the press conference, and who could blame him, because he was probably on the phone from the minute he was hired, not only doing the press conferences that he needed to and talking to the people within the building, but that then minute number one, once you sign the deal, becomes, okay, you get and hang on to who you can here, because we're building the roster right now.
Yeah, and I think the delayed transfer portal coming in January, and there's a window that opens when there's a new coach hired for players to leave, but I think that delay is going to help that he can get his staff together. He can sort of get things situated. Jonathan Smith, if you remember 2 years ago, sort of had to scramble to get everything together. I mean, in 2 weeks, he pretty much had his staff set, was hitting guys up in the portal, brought some with him from Oregon State. But I think the way things have, there's always the business behind the scenes, right? And when there's agents involved and, there's people reaching out during seasons to sort of recruit guys, that's a problem in all of college sports, but especially in football. There's always some issues to deal with there. But I think the slower clock, I guess, if you will, of what the offseason is going to look like this year, that some of the rules passed and changed the dynamic of, I think he can benefit from those a lot. And one thing I've noticed, too, is that he is very good at energizing people, especially donors. He's a guy that there's a lot of hope behind. And the product on the field and the wins are what's going to ultimately dictate if people believe in that for a long-term perspective. But he's a guy who's been able to win with less. And I think where Michigan State is at, obviously it's an athletic department that has its debts and is sort of digging out of those. It can't flaunt and wield money like an Ohio State or a Michigan or an Oregon or even, I mentioned Ohio State, but some of these SEC schools, for example. It understands its resources, and it's, I think, trying to increase those. And they've obviously added Spartan Ventures, which is their third-party capital sort of investment firm that they're starting up, and it's going to deal with a lot of media rights and NIL. But the way that they've approached that and sort of used this Fitzgerald hire to spark some of the interest there and get some people on board, I think there's been a bit of a shift with how people are looking at Michigan State in the Big Ten and sort of where their resources can lie.
It'll be interesting to follow here because, you hit it on the head with the fact that their main successful route as far as the football program is typically a guy that can come in and elevate kind of, I don't want to say middling because that sounds too discriminatory, but basically talent that is maybe undervalued and then getting the maximum out of kind of, maybe the 3-star range kind of recruits because, there's a lot of money being thrown around. And like you said, it's hard to play in that end of the pool unless you're really armed properly. And they've got a lot of other financial issues that they've got to attend to with what you're talking about them addressing, but they've proven that they can do that in the past as far as identify some talent that works well for their culture and what they're building. They're bringing in some of the former players like Bola, who seems like a good tie to Fitzgerald there. So I thought that was a smart hire. Like you said, both former linebackers. So it'll be an exciting team to follow, both sides. And we'll look forward to having you back on, especially hopefully by the end of the basketball season, because I expect it to be a long season for him here. But we'll be following your coverage either way in between, and make sure to tell people where they can follow you here.
Yeah, DetroitNews.com/sports. You'll see all of our coverage, but Michigan State included. On Twitter, it's at Connor Earegood, ConnorEaregood. Thanks for having me on anytime.
Definitely. Happy to have you on. Glad you could join us and appreciate the coverage, and we'll look forward to having you on again soon here.
Excellent.
Thanks, Connor. All right. Thanks, Connor Earegood. Appreciate him coming on. And we're going to turn our attention to hockey and maybe sneak in a little bit of wrestling, too, because I've been wanting to talk about this with Big G. We'll probably talk about it some in the final segment. But we got Tyler Kuehl coming on at the Daily Face-Off. He covers the Red Wings for us, but he was also seemed to be pretty wrapped up in what was John Cena's final match here in WWE over the weekend. And since Big G's a big wrestling fan, we might start him off with that because I haven't been asking anybody's favorite cupcake, Big G, so I've been missing out on that. So we got to throw him a little bit of a curve at the beginning here.
I just noticed that, and you're fired.
Well, see, I mean, you fired me very early, and now that's the second time. But I went a long time. I went like an hour without you firing me. That's pretty long.
You did. If Deb were here, she'd be very proud of you.
Well, also, you didn't even notice, so I guess I told on myself. So can I get some credit for self-reporting?
Okay, you're just suspended.
Oh, okay. Well, perfect. Okay, that's good. So the suspension hasn't been actually levied yet, so I'll get to finish the show, and then we'll see what happens there. But we'll bring on Tyler Kuehl after the break and talk some hockey and maybe a little wrestling with him. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest here, Tyler Kuehl. He writes for the Daily Face-Off and contributes to other outlets here that we'll have him plug at the end. But I'm going to throw him a little curve here. He's been on the show enough to know that we usually ask him the thing of the day or what have you. But I've missed that with the last couple, and it's a lot of baked goods here, Tyler. It's just cookies and brownies and cupcake was the thing of the day. But I'm going to throw you a curve because I noticed from looking at your acts, as I normally do before we have the interview, I studied kind of your articles and your X account. We have two wrestling fans in studio, and I noticed you were tweeting a lot about about John Cena's final match. So I wanted to open it up so that Big G and I can have a discussion with you on your thoughts on the final match, and I swear we'll cover some hockey too.
No, yeah, guys, it was, thanks for having me on again, Ryan. Good to hear from you guys. But the reason why it was such a big deal, I had a friend of mine come over and watch the match on Saturday night's main event because for those that don't know, I wasn't born a wrestling fan. Like, I was born in the 90s, so you think, oh, the Attitude Era and everything, it'd be great. But I just never became a real fan. But my dad got free tickets to a random SmackDown show in March of 2004. It was right after WrestleMania 20, and one of the guys that came out was John Cena. He was wearing a Magic Johnson Michigan State jersey, kind of repping the quote-unquote hometown feel, and I thought, man, this guy's really cool. It's coming out in basketball jerseys. This guy might be legit, and 21 years later, I've thought the same thing, so I got jacked up for his final match, and knowing that it no matter what was going to happen, it wasn't going to be like some 5-star, Matt Classic, but just the ending of it, it turned me the wrong way. My buddy and I, we were ready to have this emotional farewell, but we both sat there after the show with our head in our hands. We're like, that can't be it. That cannot be the final end to John Cena's 17-time champion career.
Well, Big G and I have covered some wrestling on the air, and so that's why we haven't done it this episode, but I saved it specifically because I saw that. I like to kind of look at kind of the deeper routes of booking and things in wrestling, because a lot of people can say, well, okay, so you're a hockey guy, you cover hockey. Well, it's not like the regular sports because it's booked, it's predetermined. But that's one of the things that's interesting to me is that there's fan engagement that can potentially change the result of things. But in this case, they went with the very classic booking decision of the storied athlete going out on his back, giving the bump, the proverbial bump to the next guy coming up, and so then trying to raise that guy up the charts and then building him up to inevitably fall to somebody else, and that's kind of how the dominoes work of wrestling. But it was amazing to see how stunned that arena was, because I think a lot of people shared your belief that it should have gone differently. Did you have a scenario that you kind of wanted them to end with? Like, if you were kind of dream booking it, what would you have done with it?
As soon as Gunther won the last time his now tournament, my buddy and I were thinking, how can this possibly end? Because Gunther, for those that are wrestling fans, know that Gunther does not have a quote-unquote knockout finisher. His move is the sleeper, right? He puts guys to sleep and stuff. So it was like, are we really going to see John Cena tap? And I hadn't realized that until I mentioned on the show. He hadn't tapped since 2004. He hadn't, gone to submission. And the way it ended with a slight smirk on his face, knowing that it was over, tapping out, and putting Gunther over. My thing is, it's funny because my buddy and I went to the last SmackDown show, Cena's last appearance in Grand Rapids earlier in the summer, and we're actually going to the SmackDown show next week at Van Andel Arena. And we went there, knowing John Cena's a good guy, but at that point he was still doing his heel run, and we yelled at him and screamed at him, and he's the bad guy, right? So we got into it, but we're for a guy that's done so much in his career, we just know now that if you're going to put Gunther over as the guy that forced John Cena to tap out in his last match, Gunther better go on a run of all runs of, going straight to the championship, being in the main event at WrestleMania this coming spring. That's what I'm concerned with, is WWE going to push Gunther to the sky, through the ceiling, and make him this all-be superstar. And everyone's pointing now at Brock Lesnar. That's the only guy he hasn't beaten yet. So I'm like, is that the guy that he forces to tap out? Because if you're going to beat John Cena, you better beat everybody.
Well, I think that's where the fan engagement, I think, is going to come in to a degree, because they were showing him. He was getting hassled even just going to his tour bus afterwards. There were grown men that were following him there, and he was getting hassled. And so now I think the crowds from this point forward are going to be they're probably on the. They're basically on right now for Raw, so I don't know what's going on. You jumped on the mic here, Big G.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of Raw, and Gunther opened it, and oh my goodness, does he have nuclear heat?
That's what I was just going to assume. So I'm glad you confirmed that, because with that reaction and how they were handling him, I think you're going to kind of get what you want here, Tyler, somewhat organically, because now with the amount of heat that he's getting, he's going to become the most natural one to book that way, and then eventually put a babyface over that can be booked against them, and then hopefully get that rub, because that's the weird thing about when a face goes out, especially somebody like John Cena. You got to put a heel over on the way out. That's the more natural progression, and then that heel uses that heat to put the face over. But now we're doing wrestling philosophy here with a guy that's got very good hockey expertise. But I did want to have that discussion with you, because you clearly were watching that. Even with your son, it looked like was he watching?
Oh no, he went to bed. He's got an 8:00 bedtime. But I wanted him to know who John Cena was, so I looked into his best matches. I'm like, I can't just show him a WrestleMania match. That's too easy. I'm like, how about this random Raw match from April it was right before Backlash 07. It was after WrestleMania 23. Him and Shawn Michaels. And the funny story of that match was John Cena had been out with Ric Flair the night before that match. So then him and Shawn go on 60 Minutes the next night. Just adds to the lore of John Cena. So I didn't explain to my son why John Cena might have looked a little sluggish in that match, because I think he's too young to understand that. But he was sitting there, and so now he loves to say Shawn Michaels, not John Cena. He loves Shawn Michaels now. So eventually we'll get to the deeper depths of HBK's career when the time comes.
I like that's one of the earlier things that he's saying. You can tell what you're teaching him there. So that's,
as long as he doesn't say what Shawn Michaels and Triple H said this age, I don't need him getting kicked out of daycare yet. So as long as he keeps the DX stuff to a minimum, I think we'll be okay.
Exactly. You got to be careful when you go back into that era, because like you said, you didn't necessarily grow up in that era, but that wasn't as kid friendly. They're going a lot more kid friendly with the content these days. But yeah, interesting discussion. I want to transition to hockey here a little bit, because you got great expertise there, and I think I'm more fascinated by this Red Wings team than maybe some, but I'm seeing some interesting elements. But I'm curious to kind of get your takes on the season so far, because I know people are a little impatient here. I know about the timeline and all of that, but I think they've made some interesting changes from last year to this year, and I feel like between how they've played so far, having the coaching staff actually installed, which we've talked about before, we talked about the transition last year, and now having some of these young guys that are coming in and giving some new blood, and you can see the compound effect. This is what's fun when you get young guys in there, especially, I'm not used to this in hockey, I'm used to this in other sports, but man, those guys are just getting out there and skating, and they're just letting it loose, and that's, I think, helping everybody feel kind of young, even the Van Riemsdykes and Canes of the world. And it's really a compound effect where you can see these guys getting better almost game by game. So then you've got a set of players that should be improving more in an exponential fashion as the year goes on. So I have maybe a more hopeful outlook than some on this team, but I'm curious how you've kind of seen them here so far.
Well, it's just been an up and down season, right? Like they had the strong start at home, and everyone thought, okay, well maybe this team is actually good. But then they kind of came back down to earth, and like everyone's like, all right, here we go again. And the issue was, you mentioned the young guys, but I kind of want to mention the older ones here because for me the biggest concern was the goaltending. Right? They go out and get John Gibson, who I thought was a little bit of an overbuy because he hasn't really been the number one guy for the last few years when he's with the Anaheim Ducks. Like he lost the number one job to Lucas Dostal last year, and that's what made him available to Steve Yzerman. And I think the Red Wings kind of overpaid him, kind of gave up a little too much to acquire him at last year's draft. But it's funny. I thought, while these young kids, the Emmett Finneys, the Axel Sandin Pelikas, and Simon Edmondson's continue to come along here, and obviously Lucas Raymond's one of the stars on this team for the last couple of years. Like these guys will lead the crew, but I think the goaltending might hurt them. And since early December or earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, like Talbot's been great. He's been a little more consistent than two, but Gibson's been on fire. Right, he played well this past week. Played fantastic. Posted a couple of shutouts here and there. I mean, the game against Chicago on Sunday, right? You're going up against, I know they didn't have Connor Bedard, but they still have a hungry Hawks team there. He posts another shutout. Now he's got 2 on the year, 2 in his last 3 games. And for a guy that I thought was going to be a liability heading into the season and, question his work ethic and whatnot. And right now the Red Wings were here December 15th, still battling for first place in the Atlantic, right? I as optimistic as some Wings fans were, how many of them are actually thinking, we can challenge for first place? They think they'd be fighting for a wild card spot at this point of the year. And I think that's what's important here. And you mentioned the young guys. I think Emmett Finney was the one that no one expected in September to be a factor for this team. We thought he was going to be in Grand Rapids over here. We'll get him to see him develop a little bit, then maybe get a call-up later in the year, similar to what we've seen with someone like Nate Danielson, another guy who's made an immediate impact over the last couple of weeks since he's been called up from the Griffins. But Finney had a really great camp, and next thing you know, he's on the top line opening night, and his speed, his awareness, and his creativity with the puck, his ability to find guys in open spaces, his ability to finish as well, just an all-around great offensive player. Still some things to work on for sure as a rookie, but if you're asking anything out of a young kid like him, I mean, he's checked all the boxes. And Sandy Pellica, we thought he might be a guy that come down to Grand Rapids as well. He makes the team, and similar to Finney in a way, but obviously being a defenseman, you're asked a lot more. But I think he's filled his role. He's seen a lot of time on the power play. There's just so many tools that this Red Wings team has. And a lot of these tools have been over there for the last couple of years, right? With obviously Larkin, DeBrincat, JT Compher, so on, Mo Seider. But everything has just kind of been working, and it clicks at the right time, and they've beaten teams they shouldn't beat. Granted, they've lost games they probably shouldn't have, but at the same token, they've found ways to win games that in the past few years they'd find a way to lose, right? And I think that shows the maturity of this team, the maturity of this core. Everything from Todd McClellan's message, I think, has really picked up since training camp. And like I said, I mean, we still got a few more months to go before the season's over. We obviously got the Olympic break, which can either stop momentum or give teams a chance to rest. We'll see how that goes. But the Red Wings have put themselves in a spot to be a Stanley Cup playoff contender, which, I know a couple of years ago we missed out on the final day of the season, but, right now the confidence level is high within this team, and the optimism's there in Hockey Town.
I agree. Your last points make me think of 2 different points. So I think we're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk about some of those veteran acquisitions, and then also kind of the patience route versus kind of going all in on a trade, because that's one of the other questions I had for you. But your excerpt there makes me think of the difference in the concepts that I actually mentioned in an earlier interview about the Pistons. So stick with us. We're going to come back here with Tyler Kuehl of the Daily Faceoff. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Tyler Kuehl, the Daily Faceoff, having a good conversation about the Red Wings. Yeah, your comments make me think of kind of a twofold approach here, because that's the other thing I was going to mention when I was talking about the young guys. That's another reason that they didn't have a slow start, but the idea of, okay, you've got veterans coming in that are going to have to adjust. That's how I kind of always felt about Gibson. I thought it was going to take time for him to adjust to playing on this team and getting the consistent reps. Then Talbot took a lot of those reps, but I'm glad to see him hitting his stride. JVR kind of was similar. He didn't really have a training camp, and then he's now hit his stride. But you hit on an interesting point, because I was talking with Wes Davenport, who covered the Pistons for us, about the concept that in team building, I think people often underrate the idea of, okay, if you have a team that is enticing to come to, sometimes it's the market, sometimes it's the coach, but oftentimes it's the team success. It might be the brand, it might be the current team roster saying, hey, you've got a good young core, you've got a good team, you're on the verge of really doing something real here, and that will determine often how many assets you have to give up, whether it's through free agency or trades, to get what you need in the building and build your team up. And you talked about that with Gibson. I feel like that's kind of where the Red Wings are at now. Right now, they're kind of in the build-up phase. So to really take a swing, they'd have to kind of overpay, because that was the interesting thing when the Quinn Hughes thing was coming up, because I don't know about you, but I was even getting the feeling from some of the broadcasts that there was starting to be some real thoughts that the Red Wings might end up with him. Even some people in the building, it just seemed like there were some thoughts there. I don't know if that was just, hey, he might be available, we know he's going to be available, and we know this is potentially a good fit. But with the amount that you have to give up for him, that's a very big swing versus, like you said, the semblance of these pieces coming together. Then you're building that up and not necessarily having to spend, not that he's not a great player, but spend all that on one player. You pool those assets, try to take multiple shots at filling those roles, and then get a more organic build. It's a different approach, and it usually is a longer approach, but sometimes it's more sustained too. But I'm wondering how you felt about that whole process with Hughes getting traded, and then kind of the backlash of, well, because I mean that happens in every sport, but it's the fan base goes, well, I wish we had him, but it's something else to also give up the asset package to get him.
That was going to be the big hurdle, Ryan, for the Red Wings, because Quinn Hughes, he's I don't want to use the word generational talent, but in terms of, I mean, he's probably behind Kuehl McCarr, the second best defender in the National Hockey League. And he was in a spot where, the Vancouver Canucks, they don't really seem like they had not saying they have much of a future, but they just don't seem like they were in the right direction of where they were a couple of years ago when they won their division and whatnot. And the Red Wings were heavily involved in the conversation. Obviously, Yzerman's not going to let anything slip, but for what the Canucks need, which is more players down the middle and more young talent up front, they were looking. I mean, there was the Flyers were involved. The Flyers were among the teams that seemed interested. Minnesota, I don't think they necessarily came out of nowhere, but they were not of the front runners. It seemed like it was going to be Detroit or Philadelphia. And you look at, we mentioned Emmett Finney before the break. That was a guy that was possibly involved. Some guys were seeing tongue-in-cheek that there were some really good experienced centermen on this team. I don't know if that meant Dylan Larkin. I don't think it meant Dylan Larkin. Don't take me out of context there, but there were whispers that, there was more of that. That's what the Canucks wanted. Obviously, Lucas Raymond might have been in those discussions as well. I just don't think Yzerman, because he's been very tight to the chest on prospects. I mean, there was a chance for him to get rid of Jonathan Berggren a couple of years ago, right, at the trade deadline when the Wings were, kind of in that playoff push, but he held on to him. And I know, obviously, he's on waivers now and might be coming back to Grand Rapids here. But that said, it seemed like if the deal wasn't perfect for a guy like Quinn Hughes, and is what we saw with Vancouver, they gave up a top 6 centerman. They gave up a top 9 winger. They gave up one of their best young defensemen in Zeb Williams and a draft pick just to get one guy. I mean, if you want to go shot for shot of what the Wings would have had to given up, that might have had to include a Simon Edvinsson or a Mo Sider to get Quinn Hughes. And I just don't think, even Wings fans probably don't want that either. We know how important Sider's been the last few years, and we see the potential that Simon Edvinsson has, and a draft pick too. I mean, that's just a lot for a defenseman that may or may not fit in this mold too. And also, you have to consider the fact that after next season, 26-27, he's a free agent. Does Quinn Hughes want to re-sign in Detroit? I mean, Minnesota, I don't think they cared whether or not he wants to re-sign. Minnesota wants to win now. Obviously, Yzerman was thinking long-term with that, so if he doesn't feel that he could get Quinn Hughes for a long time, he's not going to give up 4 quality assets. So, yeah, Wings fans have reason to feel bummed that Yzerman didn't take a swing here, but if you look at what Minnesota had to give up to get Quinn Hughes, I think it's understandable why Yzerman held back, because also Minnesota right now, they're a number 3 team in that Central Division, a wild card team, give or take. The Red Wings are near the top of the division, albeit it's a very tight Eastern Conference playoff race across the board. 1 through 10, I think, is divided up by, 5-6 points. It's very close right now. But what's been working is what's in the fold right now, and I think there's a couple guys down here in Grand Rapids. We just saw John Leonard get called up here to Detroit. He's been great for the Griffins. There's guys that can help contribute there as well. So I do think if the Wings want to make the playoffs, they need to go out and make a trade at the deadline. This is the year that Yzerman has to realize, okay, I have to take a swing. The question is, how much can you give up, and what pieces do you think you need? Obviously, we have time between now and the trade deadline in early March. Obviously, he's going to have the entire Olympic break to figure out what he needs. If he decides to make a move before then, that's obviously an option. But I think right now the Wings are in a spot where they're trying to see what they have and evaluate for what they need to make a honest-to-goodness playoff push. Because you can try to, I mean, Ryan, you could ride this roster out. I said the last couple of years, the Wings should have made the playoffs the last 2 years, given what's on their roster. But on paper, it doesn't necessarily lead to on-ice success, right? So I think you take the next month or so, see where the holes are, what you need to add on to, and then go from there and decide, hear what's out there. And GMs are always talking. They're not like waiting until February 25th to say, all right, we need to make a trade now. They're doing this throughout the year. They're talking to other GMs, seeing what other GMs want to. So it's a long game process to make one of these deals. Some happen overnight, some happen over a 2-month span. So I'm excited and interested to see what Yzerman is willing to do to add to this hockey club.
Well, and I think one of the big things to remember as you were going through that great description is the fact that a lot of those names that you were talking about them giving up and how they're valuable pieces of the Red Wings roster, though a lot of those were picks that Yzerman has made since he got in the fold here to Detroit. So I think he is doing a decent amount with the picks. I know he's picked up his fair share of criticism for not building the team as aggressively or in the way that people want. And obviously you have the playoff drought for a storied franchise. I get all of that. But he is compiling a roster that once they are able to consolidate or do want to take that swing and make that trade, they'll have a lot of pieces, and I think that's important. But it's also good to know, well, hey, we're hitting on a lot of these picks, so we don't necessarily want to be flippant about trading away some of these picks or what have you, because they've brought back a lot of value because of who's doing the selecting too. So that's always something to keep in mind. But I'm curious what you have in mind here, because I agree that I think they're probably going to try to do something. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline last year. That obviously didn't go very well. They ended up missing the playoffs. It created a bit of kerfuffle in the locker room there. I think that's the official term for it. And you know, they I think will be slightly more aggressive, because I think just turning over to making the playoffs will be a good improvement this year, and then seeing what that young roster and the new additions will do. But do you have any inclination on kind of how aggressive they'll be, or what they go for? I've asked multiple people that, and it seems to kind of all come back to a similar category.
Well, I don't know how similar this is, but you have to look at what's happened the last few years near the trade deadline. The Wings have lost, there was the 1 year where they lost 2 bad games to Ottawa right before the deadline, right? And there was talks that they were looking at making a big swing then, but then Yzerman pulled back saying, all right, this team's not ready yet. And, he's never said it directly, but it seems like this team needs to earn that big swing at the deadline. That's kind of what the unwritten message has been from the front office. And it really is going to depend how this team comes out of the Olympic break, right? If they come out, February 25th, 26th, and they lose 3 games in a row, well, we need a second line winger or second line center to add some more offense here, but we're not going to give up 2 draft picks and 2 prospects to get it if we're not good enough. That's what's kind of held him back for the last couple of years. I think last year was more so pretty obvious that this team wasn't ready, but you look at that run in 23-24, if they have maybe a better depth center, a little more depth down the middle, they might win a couple more games down the stretch there, and boom, they're in the playoffs. And we're not having this conversation, right, on this, now 9-year plus playoff drought. Everyone's joking this nice, they still call it a new arena, Little Caesars Arena. The only playoff games that have been in there since that barn's been open have been the Pistons, not the Red Wings, right? So I think it's just going to depend how the team is playing into the Olympic break in February, how it comes out. Because I just don't think Yzerman is going to make a move soon here. He's going to make a move when he feels like its time is right. And maybe I think it's one of those things, too, where, and I said this before, I think Yzerman needs to make a move to show that he has confidence in his team, even if it's giving up a key young piece or a player that's playing well for them right now. Kind of showing them, hey, I went out and bought this other guy from this other team. I believe that you guys can get the job done. Because I think that bit of confidence, if you can give that to this team and say, hey, I believe in you guys, that's why I made this big trade and got rid of a couple of your friends and one of these draft picks, that's because I feel like we can make a run here. I think that'll give this team more confidence than it has right now, and that might be what pushes this team over the edge and finally gets them into the postseason. And I do think Yzerman wants to, simply get to the playoffs, but also he doesn't want to just be a one round and out, right? Like Montreal, it was fun last year for the Canadians, got to the playoffs for the first time in a few years, but they were out in 5 games. That's not what Yzerman wants. He wants a team that's going to get to the playoffs, make an honest run, maybe win a round, and then, go from there, right? Because I think winning playoff series can give more confidence to the longevity of a franchise. I mean, you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, they've won 2 playoff series in 21 years. So and look at the talent they've had over the last little bit. So I think, Yzerman wants to make a move. He wants to find out, but he just got to make sure that the time is right and that it's going to be worthwhile, not just to get to the playoffs, but be successful in the postseason.
I think you made a lot of great points there, especially the idea. I find it especially interesting, the idea of motivating the rest of the team, because that was kind of, I think, part of Larkin's argument last year of, hey, we're out here working and, give us some help to work with. Maybe you do that this year and kind of have a call and response thing there. But it'll be interesting to follow. I think it's been an interesting team so far, and then adding new pieces in would be great to add some juice in there. But we'll be following up with you, and maybe even after that, and seeing how what your thoughts are on any new acquisitions. But until then, make sure to tell the people where they can follow you here.
Well, you can follow all of our great writers at Daily Faceoff at dailyfaceoff.com. We got a lot of great stuff. We're gearing up for the Olympics here. I'm doing a lot of women's hockey coverage for the Olympics. We're really excited about the coverage we have coming out in the next month and a half here, and obviously for all the games in Milan, which, for those who have been following the arena story out there, it's been a lot of tire fire going on with that. But you can also follow me on X or Twitter, whatever you still call it, at TJKU29. Lots of great stuff, and excited to see what the Red Wings do. And for those that live in the area, if you don't want to watch the Wings, that's fine. Just come down to Van Andel. The best team, the best start in American Hockey League history is happening over here. The Grand Rapids Griffins have just been tearing it up this year. They've been exciting, and a lot of those guys you're seeing in Grand Rapids will be in Detroit tomorrow, it seems like.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been busy with Red Wings coverage and trying to work out the coverage on the 2 shows here now, but we've got some incoming Griffins coverage here with the Hockeytown West guys, Elaine Shercliffe, and a bunch of folks. So we'll be covering them too. But appreciate you coming on. We'll look forward to your coverage again in the future here.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate Tyler Kuehl coming on, as well as the rest of our guests, Connor Earegood, Wes Davenport, and then, of course, Big G in studio. And Big G and I will come back after the break and finish up the show.
Yeah.
He's pumped. So you're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors like Mary Free Bed and Collectible Insurance Services, as well as Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, and Williams Chiropractic. I want to thank you guys all for listening. Want to thank Big G for keeping me on track here, but he's looking like Alexander Graham Bell over here. He's got multiple phones. What's going on over here, Big G?
Well, we've had some technical difficulties. The phone that I usually use didn't work, so I had to swap phones with the phone that's normally in what we call the passenger seat on Polka Pops. So we finally got everything working, and it's been, like you said, and one of my favorite words, it's been a bit of a kerfuffle tonight.
Kerfuffle is just fun to say.
It is.
That's why it's funny. I feel like I have a tendency to say those things during the hockey interviews. I don't know why, because the hockey ones are usually the most serious. I feel like they're very serious about their sport, and I have a tendency to mix those things in more so in the hockey interviews than the other ones, I feel like.
Gotcha. Yeah. Kerfuffle, shenanigans is my favorite.
You got to be careful with that one, though. Can become other things, shenanigans. The way you started that, I got a little nervous. But
now I've been doing this long time. I know what I can and cannot get away with.
Yeah, well, you had a good pronunciation earlier on of a word that started with a B. The way you pronounced it, I noticed that. So that was good. So yeah, you know your stuff. You've been around a lot longer than me, that's for sure, Big G. But
kid.
But it's kind of nice to be called that. I'm feeling less and less like a kid every day, so I'll take it, Big G. There's a lot of gray in my beard now here. So, but no, want to make sure to emphasize the rest of we were talking about the Jethro lineup a little bit as it continues to get filled out. But to get the sports side, I often preview the sports side, but we got Dave Conrad and Conrad's Country Bunker and Rowdy Yates doing it every day during the day for both their shows, 9 to 2 and 2 to 7 respectively. And then got the Sports Project, our buddy over there, Steve Project, doing it 7 to 9 and yeah, exactly, and 7 to 9 on Wednesday and 10 to 12 on Saturday. Got the new show, Shane Graham's Extra Points, with me on Thursdays 7 to 9, and then the aforementioned Polka Pops, as well as Jeff Isaac's All Request Show on the weekend. So nice diverse lineup. I like how diverse our lineup is at Jethro. Not to mention the grilling guys too that thrown in there.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of different things you'll learn here at the station. But appreciate you listening. Be sure to tune in to the rest of the lineup and tune in to us next week. And until then, stay informed and stay vigilant. Have a great week.